Hey there, wonderful listeners. Welcome to another empowering episode of Whispers of the Womb. In episode 23, I'm thrilled to be joined by the incredible Doireann Barrett from Ireland. Doireann is the founder of Sinesu, a vital community initiative established in 2021 as part of the Gluten-Free Kitchen Company. Join us as Doireann shares her personal journey of resilience and discovery, navigating life with Coeliac Disease and Stage 4 Endometriosis. Her story is not only inspiring, but sheds light on the challenges faced by those adapting to or living with chronic health conditions. Let's dive into the insightful conversation and build a stronger, supportive community together. Stay tuned for a journey of strength, hope, and wellness. So welcome, Doireann, and we are delighted to have you today on the Whispers of the Womb podcast. So thank you so much for joining us. So I would love for you to share with the listeners a little bit about you, what it is that you do, and what you offer from sunny Ireland.
Thank you so much for having me. I am Doireann Barrett. I am from a town called Tralee, County Kerry, in the southwest of Ireland. And I own a food and wellness brand called the Gluten-Free Kitchen Company. And part of that project, I have Canasu, which is a community support project. Canasu means healing in the Irish language. And basically it is a whole different aspect of all my life living with health conditions and what I've learned, what I'd love to, share with people and to support people who are going through difficulties or who have been living a really long and difficult life with diagnosis. And, life is what it is and it's hard for people to connect. So, that's kind of where the Gluten-Free Kitchen Company in Canasu came from.
That's brilliant. So what kind of things do you do there? What do you offer? And how long has it been going for?
So I set up the company in 2011 and I started the business by basically selling my handmade food products to the community, and the project took off from there. So the concept of the business was all the food and skin care and holistic rituals and lifestyle choices that I had to adapt to when I had my own health diagnosis. I wanted to offer that lifestyle to other people and show them that you could still enjoy life, but these are the changes you need to make. And I wanted to help people. So I said, no better way than just do it yourself.
Excellent. And so what would you say is your best product that you've offered since you opened?
You know what, I get asked that so often, and it's impossible to say one thing in particular because I have a huge range. So it can be anything from skincare to hygiene care to supplements, vitamins and supplements, to food products that include breads, scones, cakes, celebration cakes, salad boxes, sandwiches. It really depends on the event, and there's no one product that is a better seller. It's that there's so many people requiring so many different things that I slot into many people's lives.
And so could you talk us through a little bit, you said that this journey started because of your own ill health. Mm-hmm. And so could you just explain a little bit for the listeners, like what happened and when?
Yeah. So all my life I had health symptoms. And where I'm living in the southwest of Ireland, we're quite rural. And I was born in 1979, so we didn't have the structure set up. And it's very similar to today, to be quite honest. But if you needed specialist healthcare, you needed to go to the major cities. So information wasn't as readily available anyway in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, to be perfectly frank.
Yes,
And
there was no Google, was there?
no, and like I think it was 2009 when Facebook started. So, you know, we really didn't have access to information like the generation now.
Yeah.
So I was the child who always had diet related issues from when I was a baby. So my mum, like I've asked her questions obviously as an adult about my childhood, and she would have brought me to the doctor, and they said, oh, try keeping her off milk. So I was always the child who had the special milk, or no diagnosis whatsoever. And then um, when I hit puberty, I had very difficult women's health symptoms, and was told that is normal. It's normal. That's what being a woman is. So when I was 20, I went to Australia, and over in Australia in 1999, I had, I can't even remember the actual details, but I know I ended up in hospital, which was obviously a flare up, and was told out there that I had to have a cervical smear test done, which I had done. And I was told in 1999, when you think about, the whole HPV and cervical cancer, that was quite advanced really, and told that I would have to have smear tests every year. But the information wasn't explained, like it is now.
Yeah.
I think as well back then, whenever you had a health issue, it was nearly that the medics were afraid to alarm you, so they only told you enough you could nearly process. Where now we have far too much access to information overload. So when I got back from Australia, I became pregnant at the age of 22. It was unplanned but wanted, and I had very, very difficult pregnancy. Like, again, told this is normal. This is how pregnancies are. No alarm bells, no going. I still went to work every day, even though I had hyperemesis. Didn't even know what the word hyperemesis was until much, much later. And after I had my son, my whole immune system crashed. And I spent the next 3 years researching my symptoms, and in 2004, I got diagnosed with celiac disease, which is an autoimmune disease, and 12 months later with stage 4 endometriosis. And endometriosis is a chronic systemic inflammatory disease. However, with those two diagnoses, there was no information. So I was literally left to go out of the hospital on your own merry way and live life as it is.
And get on with it. Off you go. Yeah.
And that's kind of how Gluten-Free Kitchen Company was born in 2011. I had literally gone until 2011 trying to find myself, trying to be normal, trying to adjust. And when I think back now, how did I function? Because I must have been functioning in hypervigilance constantly, in fight or flight, constantly.
Yeah, constantly on alert, aren't you? And constantly just, you're frightened to calm down, because I think that constant adrenaline is just what keeps you going.
It is just powerful, and with the amount of information on social media now and available to us at the touch of a button, I read things and I'm like, how have I survived 2023? So that's kind of how my concept evolved, was from my own experience and knowing that I wasn't unique. There was nothing unique about my experience. It had to be in other people out there.
And that's about, once you've kind of, I guess as well, once you've been diagnosed and you know what you're dealing with, even though there wasn't really much information out there at the time, which was the same for me, at least you've got something to work with. And you went and decided, right, I'm going to do this with my health and wellness. And I went down the reflexology, Reiki, meditation, yoga route, because that was what just helped me. And so what challenges did you face as you transitioned into that, your own wellness regime?
At the beginning, it's funny, I did Reiki 1 as well in 2011. And I was faced with so much gaslighting from like I suppose the community I was in.
Yeah.
And that's no disrespect, just that it was different and it was change and it wasn't part of the norm. So at the beginning, like there was a lot of really difficult judgments made towards me, like, you're doing a lot of angel things, you're doing a lot of like spiritual things, like basically insinuating I had lost my mind. And I I would have always been incredibly intuitive. So I always listened to my intuition from a very, very young child. And my godmother is also quite spiritual and introduced me to the world of Reiki and spiritual living. And I mean, she had an incredible career in the mental health services. So I valued that, do you know what? This is someone who works in mental health. And I can guarantee you that I am not like unwell.
Yeah.
In that space. So I suppose it was part of an awakening where I had to face these challenges when I was literally trying to express myself in a way where I knew that the information was not readily available for our community. And how was I going to deliver that information? And I was living with such chronic symptoms and being gaslit nonstop by medics and assuming that because I had a diagnosis that the medical professionals knew what it was. So every time I was rushed into hospital, first thing I would say is I have celiac disease and endometriosis. And I would assume
that they would know, like, right, okay, we know what we're dealing with. Yeah.
And it wasn't until, well, I suspected for many years that, do they not know what I'm like? Am I saying it wrong? Like, what is it I'm saying wrong? And it wasn't until October 2022 when I saw Below the Belt, Hillary Clinton and Shannon Cohen's documentary. And I sat in the audience going, I knew I wasn't losing my mind. Medics weren't trained. They're given 1 hour training in their entire medical training on endometriosis. And if you choose to specialize in it, that's when they go and specialize in it. So most medical professionals didn't know what it was because, number one, it was defined incorrectly for decades. And then they only had 1 hour. So 1 hour is training. 1 hour.
1 hour.
Yeah.
My God.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah. So there's a lot of grief and trauma attached to that. But I found ways of dealing with my grief and trauma over the years.
And you've just mentioned there Below the Belt. And I know you've got like another little following. You just explain to the listeners what it is that you've been working on in the last couple of years and what's been happening in that area there.
So as part of the gluten-free kitchen company, everybody assumed that, it was just food related. And again, it was trying to get that information out there that the gluten-free kitchen company was named after my kitchen having to be gluten-free because I'm celiac. Then it became a brand. Then the community assumed it was just food. So I hit challenges where I was like, well, it's actually a whole lifestyle. So I was very lucky to get grant aids through my local enterprise over the years. And I basically went on my website and I started building page after page after page to build community and show that it was food and wellness. But I decided, how am I going to nearly categorize it So in 2015, I decided to set up a separate social media platform. And I just called it Doireann Barrett's Wellness Journey. And started publicly posting about my symptoms, what I was going through, how it was affecting my friendships, how it was affecting my family relationships, how it was affecting my romantic relationships. And people thought I was losing my mind.
Again,
So I was like,
I'm not.
I'm really not. I can get you the psychiatric reports, whatever you need. I'm really not. So it was funny. I was developing a community, and then I started realizing the whole online world and how people worked on the online world. So there was still stigma and shame about like if you liked certain pages. And then I noticed that people were following my pages without liking it, benefiting from the content because it made them feel um, same.
Yeah, they felt inclusive and like someone else got them. Yeah.
So I was getting private messages from people that weren't following me and reaching out to me. And I said, there is a huge community out there that want to feel heard and seen and validated. So the trolling didn't bother me anymore because I was like, look, I'm not doing this for likes, shares, success. I'm doing this because there's more than me out there that are feeling lost in a journey, especially when you Google the definition of endometriosis and it's incorrect. Like, let's start using our voices and making a change and breaking cycles and ridding stigmas. So I decided 3 years ago to rename that part of the project and call it Knasu, which is Irish for healing, because we're all on a healing journey. Every single one of us, whether it's childhood trauma, illness, whatever.
Yeah.
So Knasu was born, and really probably in the last year, it's starting to build such a community because of I suppose, since the documentary premiered in Ireland last year, I decided, you know what, everything is Dublin based. It's like in the UK, everything is cities, the main cities.
Yeah.
And it's not so viable for everyone to be able to go to Dublin. So I said, I'm going to create an awareness campaign in rural Ireland. And I got the license of the screening, and I'm going to screen it on International Women's Day, March 8th, in our hometown.
Excellent.
I'm working on that at the moment, and it's fully reliant on ticket sales. This is a not-for-profit. It's fully reliant, and it's to create awareness, show people there is information available. There are changes being made within the government frameworks, but everybody's learning.
Yeah. And that's an in-person event, isn't it, in Ireland? Yeah.
In-person event. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And so do you think in the future you might be doing something online for the online global community? Presumably you've still got a following in that community, global.
Yeah, so I'm very active online through my social media platforms. And in relation to the Below the Belt, that's available virtually through Below the Belt. There's actually loads of documentaries that have come out in the last 12 months. And there's loads of women speaking about this condition now and speaking about the framework. And I do plan to do more online content. I've set up a podcast. I haven't started it officially yet because I actually decided to go down the professional route and have it done in studio. But I'm trying to get my ducks in order at the moment, and get everything working. But that will come possibly 2024. And yeah, I talk to my community every day through social media, and I have support. I've created support groups in Kerry to have casual meetups so that we can meet for a coffee for an hour once a month.
Brilliant. Thank you. So I've just got a little bit of a, what would you, if you were like talking to your younger self, or say someone younger is listening to this and they're thinking, I think I've got endometriosis, or they've just been recently diagnosed, what would you say to that younger self now? What advice would you give yourself?
Well, it's amazing. Until I was 16, I was so confident. And I trusted myself. I trusted my intuition. And society and teenage years and adults of a certain generation, they bullied that out of me for a long time, that I actually stayed very quiet. And I was the quiet girl then. Like the quiet girl doesn't get their head bitten off or doesn't get, gaslit. And like that went on until I was 32. And then I had my voice and I was like, I'm not going to be dismissed anymore. Like too much has happened. Like I lost my fertility. I just wasn't being bullied anymore. So I guess to tell my younger self that you were always correct in what you were feeling. We didn't have the language back then. The language is there now. Supports are there now. I mean, my son is 21. He will sit down and tell me exactly what's going on in his world. And I sit and I listen. And I feel that our generation, we weren't allowed to speak.
Yeah.
So if we spoke, we were quickly told how it was rather than listening.
Yeah. It was exactly the same for me as well. The same time frame from 16 to 32.
Isn't that incredible?
Yeah, it's exactly the same. Yeah.
And I got very interested in learning then about generational trauma and understanding the women's role. And I've had this conversation with my son about how women are still hugely oppressed and we're still meant to know our place. And that's, yes, it's not as severe, but it's still there and it's still conditioned behavior. And it's so important that our generation teach the next generation not to be that way.
Yeah.
And so for any girl that's getting a diagnosis or that has symptoms now, I think the best thing is early screening, not to read too much online because there's an overwhelm of what can happen. And to remember that our generation are speaking of advanced stages, but early screening and early monitoring can prevent all of that scary stuff.
Yeah.
And I think we'll be the generation to end that.
Yeah, because we lived for that, 16, 18 years or whatever, and we had to live with it because there was no intervention in those years. So good advice.
And I had a woman phone me last week after a radio interview I was on, and she must have been in her late 60s, and she rang just to say that she felt validated for the first time.
Oh.
And that she had lived with symptoms so horrific that she was told that was normal. And it just, it makes me cry every time.
And as well, I think in England, in the UK especially, if you think past history, where there was a lot of women in asylums, and I honestly do believe that a lot of what was wrong with these women would have probably have been hormonal, with situations like endometriosis, and they weren't believed, they weren't listened to, and that's why they were locked up.
Same in Ireland. And we also had a very strict religious aspect to that too, which is very raw in Ireland still. We had, our religious beliefs were very, very, very strict. The last women and babies laundries closed in 1997.
Whoa.
Yeah. Yeah. I got pregnant in 2001 and I was treated like the women that were treated and put into the laundries for a long, long time. And I remember like having a young child and being out with girls on a Saturday night, and I remember being told many times, best not mention that you have a child. And that used to just stab me because I am and was a great mom, providing for her child, co-parenting before co-parenting was even a thing. And like we decided to part ways when he was 1 because I knew that we were very young to be making such a lifetime commitment. It didn't mean we weren't going to love our child. And people thought I was so like strange leaving like a partner, being a single parent. And I was like, I'm not a single parent. I have his dad is involved.
Yeah, yeah.
And I'm not looking for a stepdad because he has a dad. And it was just, again, it took me years later to go backwards and learn about the laundries. Like I had the privilege of being able to ask my godmother about the institutions because she was the manager of the whole of our area, like I think counties or something, our whole region. And I learned that the word hysterectomy comes from hysteria, hysterical women.
Yeah, they're right, yeah.
I mean, that is just
Mhm.
madness.
And how, yeah, I mean, that's just,
And on that topic, last year was the first time in my life that because my estrogen levels were are so deficient, I had 2 episodes in 6 months where I ended up having to be brought to hospital, and the medics thought I was psychiatric. Only that I had my legal team and my medical team to tell them what I was actually dealing with, that I had severe endometriosis, I was awaiting major surgery, and that my estrogen levels were deficient.
Mhm.
And it scared me so much for the women before me.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Think
And
that
what they
they
went
didn't
through.
have they didn't have a voice and they couldn't explain. Well, they wouldn't have known, would they? They probably
No,
didn't even know. Probably did think they were mad.
but there's women today that are being diagnosed with psychiatric and mental health issues that
Hmm.
don't have them because what they probably have is estrogen deficiency.
Hmm. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that with us. That was because that's a very personal thing
Mhm.
that you've just shared. And I guess, when you were living with that with your son, it probably just felt like, well, this is how life is. And then when you've kind of looked back and, thought, hang on, it shouldn't have been like this. This isn't right. Like, for all I've been brought up in Ireland, under the religion, and you're very committed to that, if you like. Yeah.
I remember being in church and listening to the priest, and he spoke about unmarried mothers in such a negative role. And I stood up and I walked out of the church, and I didn't go back to a service for a long, long time because it didn't sit well with me. Because I was 23 when I had my son. I had my own mortgage. I had a full-time job. I was raising my son with no man living in our house until he was 10. And that didn't sit well. I said, hold on a second. I'm not going to be a part of this type of influence. And at the time, Ireland were really shifting. Like people were learning not to be so brainwashed. And I'm a very spiritual person. I do believe in, that there's a higher power and that there's bigger than us. But I don't believe in man-made religions that sit there and tell communities how they must behave.
Yeah.
And I was so proud of myself. And I think it was around that time I was working full time. Okay. I had worked full time since I was 14 years of age. I was walking down the street and I bumped into a man that I knew who was working in the social welfare department. And he said to me, said something quick, and I said, "Excuse me?" And he said, "I hope that the gentleman that was in church with you is registered down in the welfare office." And I said, "Excuse me?" "I don't understand." And I said, "No, we don't live together." And I said, "But I'm not on the social welfare." "Oh, I assumed you were."
Oh,
And
right.
I said, "But I work full time. I have my own mortgage." And it's the first time I realized that these were the stigmas that were out there.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, "Oh, you've nothing to worry about." But I said, "Maybe you should do your own job and worry about your own
Yeah,
clientele."
yeah,
And because actually, in my position, I could give you a list of people that are fraudulently, you know, screwing the system. But I
yeah.
said, I actually work full time. I pay my taxes and I pay my mortgage and I raise my son. So yeah, we come from a very, very changing generation.
Mhm. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. Really insightful, especially when you were saying about the the laundry rooms and that 1997. I can't believe that. That's just
Yeah. And it's
yeah.
very raw in Ireland still. And, Sinead O'Connor, who recently passed away, she writes about it in her book, Rememberings. And anybody who, would like to learn the history of Ireland, read or listen to her audiobook. Very difficult listen, very difficult read. She does speak about the generation that we went through, and look at Sinead O'Connor and how vilified she was for standing up for herself so many times. And I just think she's her story is so admirable, but it also sums up the generation that is now hopefully changing.
Yeah. Oh, thanks for sharing that. I'll put that in the show notes for people so they can have a look at that. So I've got a little bit of a curveball question for you. If you could collaborate with any historical figure, living or past, who on a wellness project, who would it be and why?
Nelson Mandela.
Good one.
Mm. And my reasonings for Nelson Mandela is I was born into a very political family. So Irish politics, again, another history lesson for anybody who isn't Irish watching this. And even the Irish, I will point out there's a lot of Irish that actually don't understand history. Um, Nelson Mandela was so inspirational in so many aspects of life. And um, as I said, I was born into a political family. My great granduncle was actually the first Minister of Home Affairs. So he was involved in creating our first government. And so, you know, underage, I didn't understand the influence until I was much older, then respected how I knew a lot about politics, but not wanting to be a political person. What I think everybody needs to understand what policy is. It doesn't mean you're political. It means you understand how policy works. And we're all responsible for understanding how policy works. And as citizens of each country, our government is there to work on our behalf and not against us. And I think that Nelson Mandela really showed the world about how that was meant to be. And I was very privileged to do 4 trips to South Africa and work with township people. So I have stood in Nelson Mandela's cell on Robben Island. And that cell is tiny. And to learn the history of what they actually endured when they went through apartheid and when they were, in those prison cells, and the labor, intensive slavery that they had to do as part of their punishment. So inspiring. He always kept such a graceful manner about himself. And he made so much incredible change happen. And I think all of us learn from that. And on the wellness side of it, to learn and teach people about resilience. So when we're going through really, really difficult times, it's easy to spiral into depression and spiral into why me. But it's also very important to acknowledge the feelings that are coming up and not to dismiss them, because society has conditioned us not to be able to feel, when actually we have to feel every part of it.
Mm-hmm.
And oppression and trauma develops into illness. So the more I learned about my illness and looked back at my childhood, I learned why I have illness from childhood traumas. And like, I could write a book, and maybe one day I will, but being part of the Irish war that happened between the 26, the 26 counties being the Free State and the 6 counties being under UK occupation. My mum is from Belfast, so I got to see both sides, because we were brought up to Belfast in the 80s and 90s, and I still go up. I was there again last week. I got to see the troubles firsthand, so that traumatized me as a child. We didn't know anything about PTSD till the last decade, really. Our house would be raided in the Republic because my dad was married to a woman from Belfast, and we were also born into a political family. So I experienced an awful lot of trauma without knowing it was trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And then my illness explains how it was manifested.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. That's very insightful, and I'm sorry that you had to go through that. That must have been very, very stressful as a child.
We thought it was normal. We thought it was normal until we realized I was 15 when the ceasefire happened. So I didn't have any real understanding until I was 16, 17, 18.
Yeah, because it was your normal, wasn't it? That was what life was for you. Mm-hmm.
And like, my mum's family were still up there. My nanny didn't die until 2006, so like, we were still going up to a very troubled area where there was so much conflict and so much military, and it's still so raw,
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
So is there anything else that you would like to share with our listeners whilst we'll wrap up this episode? Anything insightful that you've got, or anything up and coming as well? So you mentioned earlier about your event that's happening in March. So for people listening in real time, that's March 2023. This will be going
2024.
2024.
Yeah.
I beg your pardon. Yes, we're in November 2023 as we're recording this. So do you want to just explain a little bit more about that maybe, and just give listeners a little idea of what's happening?
Absolutely. So it's a 3-day event. Friday is the screening of the documentary Below the Belt, and that is open. It's a ticketed event, open to the public in person. Maximum 100 people can be at that event. Tickets are for sale through my website. And then Saturday and Sunday is a wellness retreat, and it's a weekend of TLC and learning how to self-soothe, self-care, listen to the body, relax, be okay with whatever's going on in your world, whether it be endometriosis or anything at all. And that is open to an intimate group of 25 women, and it's in a hotel venue in my hometown. And the whole brochure is on my website. And I'm encouraging women to come together in circle, and we're going to have meditation, sound bowl therapy, spa treatments, walks in the woods, and relaxation. And it's really just showing people what I've learned in my lifestyle to, calm the nervous system and relax the body.
Yeah, it's wonderful that you're doing that, and just bringing everybody together as well and allowing that to happen. So thank you for creating that lovely space, and hopefully people who are listening will log on to your website and have a look what you're offering.
That'll be absolutely fantastic.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping to run more events. And, even if it's not a weekend, it could be a day, or it could be, a sound bowl therapy event, or a meetup for coffee. And it's really to create a community.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on this episode of Whispers of the Womb. It's been delightful to have you on today.
Thank you so much. And I'm so delighted with what you're doing as well. I really am.
Thank you very much, Doireann.
As we wrap up this enlightening episode with Doireann, I want to take a moment to remind you, dear listeners, about the transformative journey that awaits you in our Wellness to Womb 12-week programme. Designed to empower women of all ages, this programme, led by our incredible one-to-one coach, me, delves deep into holistic wellness. Whether you're seeking to overcome gynecological pain, enhance hormone health, or boost mental well-being, I'm here to guide you towards a happier and healthier life. Don't miss out on this opportunity to make positive lifestyle changes. Join me on this path to wellness, and let's thrive together. So until next time, stay inspired, stay well, and keep listening to the whispers of your womb.